I want to take a moment and express appreciation to Fred Anderson, to the Baptist Center and Heritage and Studies for giving me the opportunity to write this book. And also I want to thank Barbara Jackson for her special work in editing it well. And I also publicly want to express appreciation to my wife, Emily, for her endurance of these 3 long years. Because when I was not engaged in doing my work at one of the interims where I was writing. And to be honest, that's about all I did during those 3 years, to do the interim church work and do the writing on this book. But it's been a great experience for me. And I hope if you'll buy the book, it'll be a good experience for you as well. Now, any attempt to select personalities that made an impact on Baptist thinking is always going to be a subjective decision. Certain individuals will leap forward, and we would all agree that people like Walter Rauschenbusch and John Broadus and Billy Graham and Martin Luther King Jr. should certainly be there. These are my assessments in this book. There can be arguments for other people, and I'd be glad privately to debate with you about my particulars on these if you have others. There are other individuals, and their stories hopefully will be written later. Many other people who are very contemporary today, maybe their stories will be written as well. Now I want to attempt an impossible task tonight, to try to talk about 24 people in a very limited amount of space of time I have, and I will honor that time. And I'm going to do what I call an airplane view of this, so you come and join with me in this. We take a quick flight of trying to look at these persons. Now, the sad thing is I can really not go into their stories tonight, and that's one of the key things about the book, and probably one of the more interesting parts of the book are their life stories, their childhood, their education, their marriage, their conversion, and all of that. I can't go into all of that tonight, so that's the reason you need to read the book. It is there. And what I'm going to attempt to do tonight is to talk about 24 persons under 7 categories. And I began with the observation that most of these persons came from very humble backgrounds. No one would have looked on these individuals, especially in the background from which they came, and assumed that they were going to amount to anybody, except with a few exceptions. First, I want us to look at several progressive preachers: John Broadus, Harry Emerson Fosdick, and Carlyle Marney under this first umbrella. We can proudly say that John Broadus was a native son of Virginia, pastored for a while in Charlottesville, First Baptist Church. There he baptized Lottie Moon in that church. He taught for a while at the University of Virginia. And then he became one of the founders of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and then later one of the professors of preaching, and finally its president at one point. He published a book entitled The Preparation and Delivery of Sermons, and what a lot of people do not know is he had to pay to have that book published because he couldn't get anybody to publish it at first. It became, though, the foundation for Baptist preaching, and it continues in many ways to influence our Baptist preaching thought even today. He reminds us that we need to have an informed understanding of Scripture, have an openness to new and different interpretations, be always on a continuous biblical quest for new insights and new knowledge, to equip oneself with using the best scholarship that one can find, and avoid trying to entertain or being sensational as a preacher. His foundation for Baptists continues, although some today may even be unaware of his impact. Harry Emerson Fosdick, of course, is noted for being the pastor of the Riverside Church in New York City. And among his many famous sermons is the one entitled, Will the Fundamentalists Win? No question about it, Fosdick was a classical and ethical theological liberal. But he taught preachers that when you preach, you need to be concerned about the personal needs of people, and if you don't address them, they are not going to listen to you. He was not saying that you want to satisfy the listener's aspiration to feel good or to be made happy, but what are their authentic personal, social, and theological struggles. He challenged preachers to reach out and wrestle with the deepest, hardest questions about life. Now, there's some, of course, who felt like that Fosdick threw the baby out with the bathwater because he was so liberal. But others have felt like that he has challenged them to think deeply about the faith. He challenged preachers to deal with scientific, critical issues of the day and not be fearful of anything in life, but pursue and follow wherever God would lead you. And do not give in to creedal expressions of the faith, feeling like anybody has finalized what somebody can say about religion. And his powerful hymn, God of Grace and God of Glory, will continue to echo in our churches as he reminds us of the call we need for wisdom, courage, and peace in whatever day we're living. Carlisle Marney is one of my favorite preachers, and many of us remember him at being at Myers Park Church in Charlotte. Some do not know that when he was a student at Southern Seminary, he went with Henley Barnett down to the Haymarket district in the inner city of Louisville, and he did a revival there for them in the Union Gospel Mission. He, along with Clarence Jordan, led in this revival, and they attracted large crowds of people, in particular with Marney playing on his trombone, The Holy City. Who would have ever thought Carlisle Marney would have been there? One of the church members in Myers Park said about Marney's preaching, "I don't understand a thing he says, but I love to hear him preach." In one of the classrooms at New Orleans Seminary, after Marney had given a lecture to the students there, one of the students raised his hand and said, "Dr. Marney, I didn't understand a thing you said this morning in your lecture. Could you tell me in plain English so we can understand what you were saying this morning?" And Marney peered over his glasses as though he would stare a hole in that young seminary student, went over to the blackboard and wrote simply, "God is for you." Marney often preached in ways that were beyond people understanding. He was indeed a pastoral theologian. He was not in some university or seminary, though many of them tried to get him. But Marney taught us, never get settled down in any prize belief. You're always on a theological journey, so don't put that theological bag down. You're always growing. Second, let's look at conservative preachers. We began with W.A. Criswell. And some of these took a great deal of effort to be open and honest and patient and whatever, as I wrote on some of these people, and he, of course, was one of those. W.A. Criswell, as you might know, was pastor for over 50 years at First Baptist Church in Dallas, Texas. In my opinion, he was the father of the fundamentalist resurgence in the Southern Baptist Convention. Some of you may have been at the 1988 convention in San Antonio, when the historic concept of the priesthood of believers was shattered, shredded, and under the direction and influence of Criswell came forth this statement that the pastor is the ruler of the church. Very biblical, of course. The pastor is the ruler of the church, and I joined a group of other persons with Randall Lally who went to the Alamo protesting that statement. Some of you may also remember in 1984 that Criswell appeared on Bill Moyer's program, God in Politics, and he said, "I believe this notion of the separation of church and state is the figment of some infidel's imagination." Here is a man who followed George Truett, who had preached on the steps of here in Washington, D.C., talking about separation of church and state and how far he has removed. I am convinced that Criswell will be remembered as a divider of Baptists and not as someone who sought to unite us. I grew up on Lakewood Street. Thomas Road ran straight down the hill in my hometown of Lynchburg on up. After I went off to college, a young man came there and bought a little bottling company called Donald Duck Bottling Company that had gone out of business. And there Thomas Road Baptist Church started. And from that small beginning, Thomas Road Baptist Church mushroomed into that large church. And then there became Liberty University. Did you know that Liberty University is now the largest evangelical university in the world? It has 60,000 students, counting those online. One of the things you may not know about Jerry Falwell, and I'll have to confess I didn't know this, he used to do a lot of pranks and jokes and carry on even later in life. But when he was in high school, he was on the football team, and one of the football players had a father who had given a safe to the church, and one of the other football players knew the combination to that safe. And so Jerry went into the safe and got the lunch tickets for the football players, and for 2 years they had free lunch from the tickets that he got from the safe. But slowly somebody discovered what had happened there. And Falwell's name came up as the person who had done this, and suddenly he discovered this wasn't just a little lark, this was a serious felony. As the law officers talked to him, he was going to be and was the valedictorian of his class. But the principal called him in after his mother agreed to pay for the money that had been taken, several $1,000s worth of money. And he said, of course, we can't have a petty thief deliver Brookville's honor speech. Now, can we? Now, this was all before he was converted, you understand. 30 years later, he was invited back to Brookville High School to deliver the commencement service, and he talked to the students about what he had done and lessons he had learned. Falwell brought the religious right out of this dark corner into the mainstream of American political life. Rick Warren is founder, of course, founding pastor of the Saddleback Church in Orange, California, the right of the purpose-driven church and the purpose-driven life. When he was invited to give the prayer at inauguration of the Bush presidency, Billy Graham sent him his hat, indicating that now the mantle has been passed from me to you on the political platform. Some do not know that Rick Warren has what's called a peace plan in ministry. And in that peace plan reaches out to help people with HIV, AIDS, and disease, and poverty, and ignorance, and human needs. Some people also do not know that Rick Warren does what's called reverse tithing. He gives 90% back to the church. Now, a lot of ministers, most ministers, of course, can't do that. But here's somebody who has made millions in his books, but he's trying to demonstrate he's not in it primarily for the money. He also has built bridges to groups like Muslims and others, trying to reach out and talk to them about what religion is all about. A third group I want to focus on are the influence of 4 women in Baptist life. Addie Davis is a graduate of Meredith College and Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. She was the first woman ordained in the Southern Baptist Convention. She was not trying to be a pioneer. She just wanted to fulfill her sense of calling. Watt Street Baptist Church in Durham, North Carolina, after a careful, thorough examination of her by the Ordination Council, ordained her in 1964 on August 9. There were objections and, of course, resolutions that came from all over places, even the Southern Baptist Convention. But since that time, over 2,000 women have been ordained into Baptist ministry. She was the first. Very interesting and exciting story about Addie Davis. Alma Hunt, of course, so well known in Virginia, a mission enthusiast who served as executive director of the WMU from 1948 to 1974. She became the face not only for WMU, but for missions. At the 150th anniversary of the Southern Baptist Convention in 1995, she was the only woman invited to speak. And one of the comments she made was, "Missions is what makes me get up in the morning." There are a lot of fascinating stories about Alma Hunt. One of those is about the time she wanted to attend the annual meeting when they were at Virginia Beach, and she didn't have a room. And so she went down there and checked in as Earlene Jesse. Earlene Jesse, of course, was the WMU director for Virginia from 1992 to 2006. When Earlene Jesse arrived and tried to check in, they told her somebody was already in her room under her name. And the manager went to the room to see who was there, and as they opened the door, Miss Alma poked her head out of the mound of covers and exclaimed, "Earlene, is that you? I came to Virginia Beach from Roanoke and I didn't have a room. I hope Mike isn't coming too, or we might have to string a sheet." Now, this is the same woman that belonged so long to First Baptist Church in Roanoke, Virginia, a church of 6,000 that voted by a margin of 174 to 31 to leave the Virginia Baptist General Association and join the Southern Baptist Conservatives of Virginia. 4 days later, at 93 years old, the church had been her church all of her life. She moved her letter in protest to Roslyn Hills Baptist Church. Today, John Upton said of her, "She has heard the cause of mission straight from the heart." When Virginia Baptists were shaping a new vision for the 21st century, she was its first champion. I have placed in this book Julian Pendleton Russell, who is the youngest person in the book, born in 1960. She is presently pastor of the First Baptist Church in Decatur, Georgia. It's the largest church a woman has served in the Southern Baptist, in the Baptist Convention. She is representative to me of all women today who are presently serving as pastors in churches. Before that church, she went to be pastor of the Old Calvary Baptist Church in Waco, Texas. And as she was coming on her first Sunday there, we heard some of those in that earlier group, one of the young women pastors tell about the picketing and protesting that she had endured. As Julia walked toward that church, she was surrounded by picketers who had come, jeers, handmade signs, and news cameras, and all kinds of slurs being directed in her way. And as they walked along, her 7-year-old son, Taylor, squeezed her hand tightly and asked her, "Mom, Mom, who is Jezebel? And why are they calling you that?" "We'll talk about it later," she responded. "Let's just keep walking." That time, this 37-year-old woman pastor walked into that pulpit to preach to 150 people there who welcomed her enthusiastically. Those few who had voted against her did her a great favor, and they left before she got there. Molly Marshall is also one that I've chosen to mention. She follows in the theological line of persons like Georgia Hardness, Olive Wong, and Murray Daly. She was the first woman ever to teach theology in a Southern Baptist seminary, the first woman ever to be president of a Baptist seminary. In a male-dominating society, she broke new paths. She has a great heritage of ministers in her family. Her maternal great-grandfather was a Baptist missionary in Oklahoma to the Cherokee Indians and others. She's made her place in history. And when witch hunts were being directed against her and all kinds of forced pressure was put on her to resign her position at Southern Seminary, she held her head high with the suspicion and other kinds of things that were there. We can talk about her integrity and how she endured with great courage. Her gifted theological knowledge, her teaching and writing are models for all who want to follow the Baptist way. She has served as a pastor as well as a seminary professor. She indicated to me that she hoped to be remembered as one who would help shape the calling and giftedness of women in ministry and reclaim their legitimate role in ministry. A fourth category I talk about are African American preachers. Of course, you'd have to put Martin Luther King Jr. there. Without question, he is a modern American prophet, a Baptist prophet. When he got his PhD from Boston University, he could have gone to several universities to teach, but he chose to go to Montgomery, Alabama, to the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Soon he stepped onto a national pulpit as he became a champion for civil rights. Today, there are national holidays, many streets, highways, buildings, 30-foot granite memorial monuments just recently been put between the Lincoln Memorial and the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., commemorating his work. In a 2005 Discovery poll, talking about who was the greatest American, Martin Luther King Jr. was listed third on the list, ahead of George Washington. There is no question of the impact that Martin Luther King Jr. has made on Baptist history. Peter Gomes was pastor of Memorial Church at Harvard University and professor of Harvard for 41 years. Some of you may know him through some of his best-selling books, The Good Book and The Good Life. Powerful, powerful preacher. But also the gay community and other minority groups found in him a great supporter as he came out and revealed that he himself was gay, though he lived a celibate life. His thundering voice will be silenced now that he is deceased, but his impact will continue to be felt through his writings and other sermons. Gardner Taylor is another powerful preacher. He's been called the poet laureate of the pulpit. Time magazine called him the dean of the nation's black preachers. For 42 years, he served as pastor of the Concord Baptist Church of Christ in New York City, going there at the age of 30. Douglas Wiley said that Taylor one time was talking about what made a great preacher. And Taylor, in that lecture, he said, you find in this person an assembly of gifts, each of which is important to the preaching responsibility, but all of which rarely come together in one person. And these are a clarity of thought, lucidity of language, a feel for Scripture, the homiletic instinct, a capacity to see in Scriptures and out of it pursuing footprints of God, and the hurt that at last takes the shape of the cross. Add to that the quality of a voice which somehow matches the music of the language. With so many of those towered above the rest of us, there was a sense of presence. Wiley says, unwittingly, Taylor described himself because that's the kind of preacher he was. If you haven't read Gardner Taylor's sermons, you have a great treat in store. Then look with me the fifth category of 5 theologians. You can't overlook Walter Rauschenbusch, pastored for 11 years at Second Baptist Church in Hell's Kitchen, a notorious slum in New York City. He worked there with people, he ministered to people who were out of work, out of clothes, out of shoes, and out of hope, he said. And while he was there, acting as that pastor, he got up too soon from his sick bed, and it resulted in the loss of his hearing. And for the rest of his life, he had to minister without being able to hear people, and often his deafness caused him to have a sense of shyness. For 21 years, he taught at Rochester Baptist Theological Seminary. His books, Christianity in the Social Crisis, A Theology for the Social Gospel, have left a permanent impression on Baptists and many others that you cannot talk about redemption just as something private and personal. It has to include other people. He says when God holds court, humanity always crowds the audience room. We have to be concerned about institutions, collective forces of evil in society. They have to be redeemed as well, or individuals cannot be. Harvey Cox is a bridge-building theologian who taught for 44 years at Harvard University. His first year there was the publication of his book, The Secular City, which became a best-selling book and has been reintroduced again. I found it most interesting When I picked up Baptist Theologians, which was published in 1990 by Timothy George and David Dockery, Baptist Theologians, Harvey Cox is not in it. How could Timothy George not know that Harvey Cox is a Baptist? Timothy George is a graduate of Harvard. But Harvey Cox is not even mentioned in a footnote in that book. But Harvey Cox is without question one of the most powerful theologians in the whole world. Now, everybody doesn't like Harvey Cox's theology because he's very open and very liberal. He sees God in many different ways and sees Christ, I'm not coming through world religions, and there's a sense of the cosmic Christ that meets us in unexpected ways and presence. I would invite you to read one of his newest books, The Future of Faith. It would make a marvelous study book in churches to try to understand something about how we relate religion and life today. Henley Barnett, of course, taught for 4 decades at Southern Seminary and University of Medical School. Many of his former students, like Roland Armour, Ronald Sisk, and Welton Gaddy, and Paul Simmons, continue to carry on his tradition. His courage and fortitude, his sense of humor, sense of humility carry him forward. He always taught his students, you've got to learn to listen to a different drummer. You've always got to try to look at both sides of an issue. And you can't be content just to talking about faith. You've got to live it out in all of your activities in life. He was always being accused of being a heretic. But he continued to be a Baptist, though some wanted him not to be. He says you can be a Baptist and continue to have educational integrity, hold religious convictions without being closed-minded. You can be open to persons of all races and nationality. Now let me share with you a couple of Barnett stories. Eric Rusk got concerned one time because he heard that the president had gotten some letters of protest against Barnett. And he said to him, calm down, Rust. If the president doesn't receive only 1 letter a month demanding my dismissal, I don't think I'm doing my job. On receiving a letter from a person who was identified with an organization called the Baptist Faith and Message, he wrote him a letter demanding a yes or no response to his questions about the Bible. He wrote that person this letter. Dear brother, some chairman of a heresy hunting committee has written me an unbaptistic letter implying that I must subscribe to a certain view about the Bible. He signed your name to it. I thought you would appreciate knowing about it. Sincerely, Henley Barnett. And then one of my delightful little stories is the one in which all the faculty members were assigned a certain topic that they had to answer. And his assigned topic was why I believe in hell. This was to satisfy some of the heresy hunters. He said that he believed in hell for 3 reasons. First, Jesus taught it. Second, people who give it to other people ought to get some of their own. And 3, I've been there. Wayne Oates, of course, taught for 47 years at Southern Seminary at the University of Med School, and he and Henley Barnett were friends since Wake Forest days. Wayne Oates is the father of the pastoral care movement among Baptists. Names like Wade Rowett, Walter Jackson, Dan Bagby are those whose influence will continue to carry forward the legacy of Wayne Oates. He wrote 57 books. Started counseling centers, including the one at St. Matthew's Baptist Church while I was pastor there. Wayne Oates' legacy will continue for many years to come. He is a pastoral theologian. Frank Stagg was a New Testament theologian who taught at New Orleans Seminary and Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, both over 36 years. Profound knowledge of the Greek New Testament. A wonderful love with the New Testament. Walter Sheridan said, I almost named my only son Stagg because of the impact Frank Stagg had on my life. There is no question some have said that Stagg has been the premier New Testament scholar among Southern Baptists for the middle third of the 20th century. 3 great defenders of Baptist tradition. One is Walter Sheridan, a Baptist apologist and church historian. His little book, Not a Silent People, Controversies That Have Shaped Southern Baptists, and his book, The Baptist Identity for Fragile Freedoms, have had a tremendous impact on Baptists through the ages. He told me that he would like to be remembered as a person who thought serious scholarship linked with serious faith was significant, and who knew how to translate this scholarship to the average person in the pew. And there is no question he knew how to do that. He was also instrumental in helping start the Baptist Alliance, the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, and the Center for Baptist Studies at Mercer University. Cecil Sherman will be remembered as pastor of First Baptist Church, Asheville, Broadway Baptist Church, and the first coordinator of the CBF movement. He was the one who helped begin the publication of the SBC Today, which later became Baptist Today. He helped introduce and launch SBC Forum, Smith & Helgess Publishing Company, and was one of the founders of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. He will be remembered his struggles for soul liberty and religious freedom, his integrity, absolute honesty, unbending allegiance to truth, and champion of Baptist principles will continue to go forward through the years. His love and devotion to his wife, Dot, during her struggle with Alzheimer's will be remembered, especially if you read his book, By My Own Reckoning. And his book, To Be a Good and Faithful Servant, will continue to be a model to ministers how to serve Christ in the world today. If you haven't known James Dunn, that feisty advocate for religious liberty, you have missed a great Baptist personality. He was executive director of the Baptist Joint Committee on Public Affairs for 18 years. And when he was there, people knew he was there. It didn't make any difference if you were president or anything else. There were some big executives. They would rather have anybody in the world walk into their office other than James Dunn, because they knew he was going to threaten the very life out of them. Walter Sheridan said that he would vote for James Dunn as one of the Baptist voices of the 20th century America, standing most in the train of Williams, Clark, Backus, and Leland. And with those four, he was probably more like John Leland. The fundamentalists, of course, tried to undercut his work, but other Baptists moved in to deal with it. The last category is a mixed one with an evangelist, a musician, and a former president of the United States. Billy Graham, of course, a renowned evangelist, has preached to more people than anybody else in the world today. It's been estimated that he preached to 70 million people in perhaps 70 different countries. And over his radio and television ministry, probably has preached to 2 billion people. He's been on the most admired list again and again. Harvey Cox says his legacy will be mostly threefold: as an ecumenalist, bringing all people together in worship, as a prophet, and as a peacemaker. One of a negative lesson, of course, will come from his life was he got too involved with presidents and regretted it. A name that some of you may not know is Don Husted, a music and worship celebrant. He was born in 1919 and is still living today. I just got an email from his daughter a couple of days ago to make sure he'd gotten a copy of the book. He went to the conservative Boone Bible College, an institution after his father died. They discovered at 4 years old that he was a music child prodigy. And he continued to take lessons from others and graduated from school and then became the director of music at the Moody Bible Institute. And he was the organist for the Billy Graham Crusades for years, and then became professor of music at Southern Seminary, where he was there for 20 years. His books, Jubilee 2 and True Worship, have offered guidance in what authentic worship ought to be like. Unbelievable number of hymn books that he's edited, 26 volumes of keyboard music, dozens of other kinds of compositions that he has published. His concept that music is functional and is judged useful by how it fulfills its intended purpose offers worship leaders a thoughtful standard. His utilization of Bach's standard that all church music should have the purpose of glorifying God and bring edification to the people who gather for worship should be a continuing challenge for all worship leaders. The only layman in the book is Jimmy Carter, former president of the United States from 77 to 81. Of course, his presidential library and the Carter Center will, of course, continue to carry forward his legacy and his great influence for human rights and world peace in his attempt to combat poverty and disease and world health issues. He's a strong Baptist, a Baptist layman who stood for separation of church and state, taught Sunday school in his church in Plains and at First Baptist Washington. He's been an individual always concerned about Baptist principles, and he lifted Baptists so people understood worldwide something about what it was meant to be a Baptist. He had a willingness to withstand ridicule, rejection, and verbal abuse to maintain his historic Baptist principles. And Baptists should be grateful to have had somebody to take the kinds of stands that he did. He said the best Christmas he ever had was when he was completing one of the Habitat for Humanity houses for a former person who had worked on his wife's farm, Curtis Murnay, who has lost his leg to a chainsaw. And he said they worked until the darkness of Christmas Eve one night to finish that. And he said that some may have forgotten about Santa Claus, but Curtis and Martha hadn't. It was, he said, the best Christmas we ever had. Some have asked Carlyle Marney while he remained a Baptist. Listen to him. Everywhere I go, people ask me why I remain a Baptist. Being a Baptist is like being in a dark, slimy well. It's cold, clammy, uncomfortable, and filled with lots of creepy things. For years, I tried to climb out, but it was hard. The walls were slippery. I was half blind, and there were impediments everywhere. Finally, however, I got to the top. I looked around at last to see what the world was like in other denominations. After I had a good look, I just dropped back into the well. In an interview in Baptist Today, John Pierce, the executive editor, asked Harvey Cox, "How do you explain being a Baptist to those who are not?" Cox laughed and replied, "Well, I'm still a Baptist for two reasons. One was the concept of really quite radical religious freedom we talked about this afternoon, even for those with whom we disagree. The second reason he draws from Martin Luther King Jr., the beloved community. Drawing on the freedom we have, we witness to the world about the promise of God, the demands of God, the social justice, peace, harmony, healing, compassion, and all those things." Now here's my airplane view as we tried to look at this. I haven't been able to go into their life stories and other things that are there to talk about their ministries and theology in depth. I hope, though, that Baptists will read the book, especially younger Baptists and lay persons, so they can understand something about the towering figures that are there. I hope this book will challenge Baptists to explore our Baptist heritage more and think more clearly about our cardinal beliefs and cherish and sustain our sacred tradition. Happy reading.